Call.
Call. Right. Oh, one of the calls. Well. Famous name. The only ones who never betrayed the prophet. Well, now, so I read on and on. Oh, they read on and they read on, and they waded through blood up to the knee, for all the blood that shed on earth gave through the streams of that country. That's what you think when you read these chapters of the Book of Mormon. Everlastingly, strategy and tactics. Well, what kind of religious book is this, you see? It goes on telling us about who moved where and what forces go where. Why the purely technical side? Well, these are the games men play, and there's a purpose of putting them in here. Why these games? Is this to be the nature of our probation? Waging battle? Is this the sort of thing? Well, back to Liddell Hart's statement, why do we do it here? Remember, he says, I've got him here. Oops. Hey. And we mentioned it before. See, the three reasons. This is the wrong one. He thought at first that wars were economic in cause, and that's long been held by everybody, of course, in their modern times, but decided no, it wasn't. Psychological. Then finally decided no, it all came down to certain individuals. They are the cause of a certain ambitious individual. And this is the clear-cut pattern that emerges all through here, isn't it? Without those leaders, without Amoron and Malachiah, and for that matter, without Moroni, you're not going to have these wars, but they go on all the time because of ambitious men. Now, this is an interesting thing. Why should we be told this? Because we're in it deeper than ever before today. We ask, what is the ultimate form of folly, and why do we do it? Well, Hart is right. In these chapters, we're repeatedly reminded that power is the thing they're after, and that it's individuals, ambitious individuals eager for power. John Adams says, power, John Adams, second President of the United States, says, power always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak, and that it is doing God's service when it is violating all his laws. Okay? And we get that after all. What is the first commandment here in the supreme law? The law we must never violate is in Ether 8:19. This is the one. See, you have general orders, and then you have special orders. General orders are all orders that always apply. You have to know your general orders by heart, you see. But in certain emergencies and so forth, the person with the right authority can override them with special orders, you see. The same thing. Certain things you don't do. Certainly, well, take this one, for example. The Lord worketh not in secret combinations. This is your 19th verse of Enoch 8. In secret combinations, neither doth he will that man should shed blood, but in all things hath forbidden it from the beginning of man. In all things has forbidden it since the beginning of man. There is a sweeping general order. Nephi was told to cut off Laman's head, and he was extremely reluctant to do so. Of course, he rebelled against that. But that can only come from the source. Notice only the person who gave the order can rescind it here. And in this case, this is the special order. In all things has forbidden it since the beginning of man. So, what is this to us? Well, look where we stand today. I'm going to read you something, military manual I've been reading. It's a very interesting manual, incidentally. It's very interesting. 3-4. This is what we read here. This is since World War II. In the last 4 decades, since the World War II, we have participated in more wars, caused more casualty, and lavished more money on war and arms than in its entire history up until then. The United States has. And then it goes on. During a period not between 1945 and 1975, a period during which some 120 wars were recorded globally. It's the world we live in, you see. 120 wars recorded globally. The United States participated directly in 27 wars and indirectly in 36 other wars. Even now, out of the 40-odd current wars raging in the Third World, now this was 1988, just last year, out of the 40-odd current wars raging over the Third World, the United States is involved in over 1/4 of them. If one were to judge its involvement on the basis of its arms supply, and then involvement is even greater. For instance, out of the 41 countries at war today, the United States is the major supplier of arms to 21. and the not-so-major supplier to 18 others. Just about covers them all. In all, from 1972 to 1981, relative years of American innocence, its military assistance to countries engaged in war was $51 billion, or roughly the same as India spent on its defense during the same period. Today, no country is keyed up for global war, whether nuclear, conventional, subconventional, or low intensity, as the United States. It has ready, at literally a moment's notice, not only nuclear forces, but conventional and special forces for projection to any corner of the globe, to coordinate and direct its forces for war. It has parceled out the globe into regional, unified military commands, an arrangement to which no other country has resorted. To sustain global interventions, in addition, the United States maintains a worldwide web of alliances, bases, command control, communications, and intelligence facilities, prepositioned forces and logistics establishment. The array of military facilities, much on the lines of previous global empires, are buttressed by security and assistance programs and proxy forces, which in essence are an economy of forces, measure to expand U.S. influence and ease our interventions. To expand, have economy of force, let other people do it, see. At present, it has nearly 500,000 armed personnel abroad in some 333 military installations in some 40 countries. In addition, 241,000 men straddle the globe afloat in U.S. navies ready for war. To reinforce these overseas troops, the United States maintains on a permanent basis in continental United States a wide spectrum of reserves. The centerpiece of the reserves is the Rapid Development Force, RDF, which gained prominence first in the Rapid Deployment Task Force, and since 1983 has been the Central Command, whose regional responsibilities now span 17 countries in Africa and West Asia. It needs to be remembered that although the Central Command has regional command responsibility, the forces under it and the doctrines that guide them have global dimensions. It is not entirely coincidental that almost complete range of our RDF forces took part in the Grenada War. On these other forces for the global war, the U.S. spends every 2 years almost the same amount it spent on the entire Second World War. Every 2 years. Today, when we're not at war, we spend as much as we did in all of World War II. It's an amazing thing. And so it goes on. In addition to fighting wars, which according to one estimate add to over 100 years of American war since 1945, the United States has used its armed force to interfere in third countries on over 260 occasions through acts of invasion, threats of invasion, blockades, demonstrations of military force, surveillance of sovereign states, and other similar acts of war euphemistically labeled as coercive diplomacy or force without war. And so it goes on. So we're still engaged in this sordid business, you know, and the Book of Mormon is a reminder of that. There's more to it than that now. What is this to us, you see? Well, as Matthew, we're told in Matthew 25, rather Matthew 26, he who takes up the sword shall perish by the sword. And the Book of Mormon teaches us that, certainly. But why this form of probation? Which we spend so much time on earth doing this particularly silly and futile thing, because it's very expensive and never gets anywhere, really. Because their operation has been turned over to Satan, naturally. The common enemy. Remember section 1, the world of the time is not now, but is near at hand, when peace shall be taken away from the earth and the devil shall have control of his own dominion. He works best there, as a matter of fact. He's permitted to try and tempt us. And the four things that we see every day around us, the ambition, the four things that are mentioned in 1 Nephi, no, it's 2 Nephi right at the end there, isn't it? Yes, the 23rd chapter, and the next to last verse. And 3 Nephi 6:15, they repeat the four things that we should never ask for, but everybody's out for. He says for power, for gain, well, first gain for power, because gain gets power and power gets gain, of course. For gain, for power, for popularity, and the pleasures of the flesh, the lusts of the world. And of course, that's what make up your TV program. The power and the money and the popularity, which we all seek, and then, of course, you want to enjoy and gracious living and all the rest that goes with it. Well, So he takes the earth, good old Satan. He takes, as Brigham Young says, he's doing his mission manfully. I will not criticizing him. He's carrying out what he should do. He's supposed to really tempt us, and he's doing it very effectively. He takes the resources, the treasures of the earth, converts them into cash, gold and silver, which have always been the standards, always, since the earliest times we have any records of, for easier handling, and he buys off armies, navies, popes, and priests, presidents, and kings. He buys them up, buys wars for all of us. So he's going to go on, practice the old thing, but we should get wise to it by now. After all these years, are we no better? No, no better at all. We're the same state of mind, even worse as far as that goes. We have less wisdom. Was there ever such addiction to war as we see on, say, on TV today? And in the movies, so they become positively war junkies. The younger generation, they idolize the most depraved of beings. The soldier of fortune will kill anybody. And he doesn't worry about who he's killing, doesn't even think about it. He doesn't put his mind to those. There are four things. These four things I just mentioned lead to the one thing, which is extermination. To be carnally minded is death, you see, as far as that goes. And that's being carnally minded. It's sickening that at this late date we should turn to this old, weary nightmare. Will we never snap out of it, and so forth. Well, the world's never snapped out of it, and it's aware of that. We're stuck in it ever since. The word power now. There are four things that Joseph Smith deplores. He says which Joseph Smith says you should never be guilty of. Four things, and of course they are what make up careers today. The first is there are two A's and two C's. The first is to aspire. He says, an aspiring spirit is from the devil. Satan aspired, and that was his fall. He said, don't aspire to be, well, of course, that's our competitive spirit, be number one and so forth, to aspire. The second is to accuse. Devil, see the devil. Devil means accuser, diabolos. He's the accuser of his brethren. He's called that. Remember, Adam says, I do not accuse thee, speaking of Satan. Lord be thy judge, I will not bring a railing charge against Satan himself. But he brings charges, he accuses, he's always the accuser. Many stories told about it. Well, the book of Job begins with Job in heaven challenging the Lord to put Job to the test. He accuses Job of being weak and that he would fall. And he accuses, we're told, Talmud and elsewhere, he doesn't accuse falsely. He doesn't bring falsehood. He tells the truth about people and their weaknesses. And he wants God to test them and so forth, and he accuse this one and accuse that one. The accuser of his brethren is devilish, you see. Never accuse anyone. So never aspire, never accuse. But if you're going to get ahead and aspire, of course, you start out with an anti-something campaign, and then you get public favor, and that's the way you'll be able to aspire by accusing somebody. You accuse all sorts of people of things. And then the others, you should never contend. Remember when the Lord comes, we're going to have that later, if we ever get later, in the Book of Mormon, when the Lord comes to the Nephites, the first thing he says to them, there shall be no more contention among you about my doctrine as there has been in the past. All contention is of the devil. Contention is not of me, but is the devil, he says. We do not contend. All you can do, as the scripture says, you can say yea, yea, and nay, nay. Whatsoever is more nor less than this is of the devil. I can point and bear my testimony and say that is so. Or I can say that is not, and that's all I can do. I can't twist your arm and make you believe it. I may convince you by argument and so forth, but by showing, by demonstration. See, I can say yea, yea, or nay, nay. Whatsoever more of that, which is contention, all contention is of the devil, he says. So don't contend. There's no need to contend. That can spoil things quicker than anything can it. And the last one, of course, the C is coerce. You don't coerce, and that's what we do. We back up. We give orders to everybody, and we back them up with force. That's what we do. We tell everybody what to do. And so we coerce, we contend, we command, we do all these things. This is the atmosphere in which we live. This is the spirit that surrounds us now, of contention, of ambition, of rivalry, of strife, of accusation. No wonder there's no security or anything else. Everybody goes out for his thing, and to do it, he feels that there's something quite devilish about it. And only the Book of Mormon can get us out of this hole. That's the interesting thing. That's why we have it, you see. The word power occurs 639 times in the Book of Mormon. Can you imagine that? Power, power, power. 639 times. What an obsession power is, after all. Of course, there is the power of God. They're divided equally, the powers, you see. And so, the world has no solution here, see. The Book of Mormon is grim because our condition is grim. Well, all the world's great literature is grim. That's the only kind that will win the Nobel Prize. I was wondering what world literature to cite today, where the Greek tragedy, where you always run up against a stone wall and that's the end. This life is a dead end. O genesanthropon, Hostas, yes. Hostas, isa kaito meiden anarithmo. Ogen santhropon, hostas isa kaito meiden arithmo. In the Oedipus, he says, "O human race, how I count you equal to exactly nothing. Then there me countless numbers." The chorus always bemoans the human fate, and there's no getting out of it. We're caught like rats in a trap. First lines of the Iliad, after all, is that. We're just caught like rats in a trap. There's nothing we can do about it. And as we get these things here, I think Matthew Arnold brings us up to date on the theme with his classic, with his great Dover Beach. The moon is there tonight. Well, the end of it ends out the lights of France and so forth. "O love, let us be true to one another, for the world that seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither love nor joy nor light." Its joy comes first, and joy nor love nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. But we are here as on a darkling plain, swept by confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. That's our situation, you see. And that was just before World War I. He was right. He was a true prophet. He's looking across the straits at Dover Beach, and he sees the lights of France on the other side. But then him a heavy foreboding, sense of gloom. You're not going to escape from this sort of thing. What's in it? And I brought along something. There's one passage I like. It amuses me. It's from C.P. Snow, who wrote his novels about the great scientists of Cambridge in the 1930s when they just discovered that the atom wasn't solid, and that Cambridge, which of course was Newton's school, was the center of the great breakthrough in science in the early part of the 19th century, in the 1930s. And so here you have the great ray of hope and so forth. He's writing about that. Ultimate catalyst. Good things here. Now let me see. He says, well, there's a great mathematician, Hardy, here. There's a better one here about caustic. I'd marked a very good passage. Oh, here we are. Yeah. The tone, here we are. He says, the tone of science at Cambridge in 1932 was the tone of argument, it was the tone of Rutherford, who discovered the structure of the atom, first man to do that, you see. Magniloquently boastful, creatively confident, generous, argumentative, and full of hope. He's the great scientist of science fiction. You see. Science and Rutherford were on top of the world. Worldly success, he loved every minute of it. Flattery, titles, the company of high official world. He was superbly and magnificently vain as well as wise. And he enjoyed his own personality. So here is the great lovable scientists of science fiction, we say here. What more could you ask on this level? But then he goes on. He says he enjoyed a life of miraculous success. Then something strange happened, he says. But I am sure that even late in life he felt stabs of sickening insecurity. This is strange, isn't it? And then he says, does anyone really imagine that Bertrand Russell and G.H. Hardy and Rutherford and Blackett and the rest were bemused by cheerfulness as they faced their own individual state? In the crowd they were leaders, they were worshipped, but by themselves they believed with the same certainty that they believed in Rutherford's atom that they were going after this life into annihilation. That's the point. You get to the stone wall, the brick wall, that's the end. It's a one-way trip. And they're going nowhere, that they were going after this life into annihilation. Against this, they had only to offer the nature of scientific activity. That would keep them entertained. See? It's complete success on its own terms. Nobel Prize, that's great, but in itself it was a source of happiness. But it is whistling in the dark when they are alone. See? Everybody has to face that. This is the peak of success, the peak of, you've got the answers, science has given the answers, and the answers have great finality. There is nothing more. Well, no scientist should be given an answer that was as final as that, you see. That's as if the last data we're in. And since then, of course, it's been a new world. This is the time when the head of the science department, the physics department at Harvard said to students, there's no point to going on, taking graduate and work in physics. The work has all been done. And the same thing with Mr. Linforth, the foremost Hellenist at the time. I had him for lots of seminars in Berkeley, and he said, no, there's nothing left in ancient history. The work's all been done there. And he hadn't looked at anything. So there we go. But the thing is that we're caught here. We're trapped unless something can get us out of this situation. And to make it worse, of course, we spend our time fighting each other. But this is where the Book of Mormon takes off. How can anything good come out of the shambles? In the Book of Mormon, we're in the shambles here all the time, you know. Just read the newspapers, and we're in it today the same way. Well, did anything good come out of Nazareth? Remember, the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. The world in which the Lord found himself was a world of intrigue and bitterness and great prosperity and so forth, but a lot of nasty people walking all over each other. Not only the scribes, the Pharisees, the elders, and the judges, and the Romans, and everybody was playing tricks on each other, and they were making deals and so forth. And it was a terrible world he was in, and of course what happened in the year 70, the whole thing was utterly wiped out. I mean, it was just completely destroyed. The Romans did a thorough job, far more thorough than we ever thought before. They just tore it all down to bits. And during all the time Jerusalem was being destroyed, the Jews were busy fighting themselves, just like the Nephites. Always taking it out on each other. So, well, but the light is the reality. The light shines in the dark. The light was there first. How can you say that? It's darkness if there's nothing there. But the light shouldn't be there. If it's there at all, but who turned it on? When did they turn it on? If darkness is the fundamental nature of things, your black hole, you see, then the light has no business being there, as they say. It doesn't exist until we think of it. That's the new anthropism, you see. The world's wisdom gives us only one side to the picture, you see. That's C.P. Snow, is the great scientist, you see. But in no other writing is the other side of the picture presented so clearly and forcefully and convincingly as the Book of Mormon. It's just as if it were preparing us. It's saying, I'm going to give you, I've got good news and bad news. I'm going to give you the bad news first. I'm going to give it to you hot and heavy. I'll give you all the bad news. But then I'm going to give you the good news, and you would be surprised. It makes all the bad news look like nothing. You just forget everything once you get to the good news. So let's read on so we can get to the good news in the Book of Mormon. It's going to be there sometime. Now, they had that, the Lamanites were trying to make a dash out of Mulek and to follow Teancum's army, and then Laman's army zeroes into them from the Bountiful, and then from the rear, Moroni. Moroni's been waiting. His army's down to southwest there. He moves in from behind them, and they're hopelessly trapped, and they surrender now. And Moroni, 32nd verse, 52nd chapter, some things to comment on here. It was up to them to decide when to quit. You know, it's 32nd chapter. And Moroni commanded his men that they should fall upon them until they'd given up their weapons of war. As soon as they gave them up, that was it, you see. It was not extermination here. Jacob, the Zoramite leader, notice good old Zoramites. The Normites, remember, all Nephites to begin with. And therefore, they're apostates, and they're very bitter. And Jacob, he wants to go on fighting. The Libanites don't, but he does. And so he led them with exceeding fury against Moroni and cut his way through to the city of Mulek, and then there was a terrific melee, and Moroni was wounded, and Jacob was killed, and that ended this particular war. They go to rest for a long time until somebody else appears here. Well, but here, Lehi pressed upon the rear, while Moroni was wounded. Lehi pressed upon the rear with such fury, the Lamanites in the rear delivered up their weapons of war. This is just under the walls of Mulek, you see. Now Moroni, seeing their confusion, said unto them, if you will bring forth your weapons of war, we will forbear shedding your blood. He always does that. Of course, there's no Rambo in you notice Teancum doesn't do that. Moroni, we will forbear shedding your blood. So they threw down their weapons, and there were many that refused to do it. And they weren't cut down, they were taken and bound and compelled to march to the land Bountiful, where they had to build a huge stalag to hold them. And they put the prisoners to work on that, and he apologizes for having to do that, you see. Moroni always wants to play fair. But they're doing this, they set guards over the prisoners. Remember, these Laman armies were vast compared with theirs. What do you do with them? Well, they set them to burying the dead first and all the scenes of the battle, and then they marched them to Bountiful and put them in a stalag, placed them over a guard. It always made me nervous to see two MPs with Tommy guns conducting 3,000 or 4,000 Germans down the road. I mean, Here out, they break out and try to get it, but they didn't even have automatic weapons then. So how could you guard prisoners like this? Well, that's a serious problem. He tells us here. They finally can't do it. They just let them go. So they went to the city of Mulek, and he gave it to Lehi to hold it, and he went on. Lehi was a man like Moroni, much beloved by the people. So they finished their dead in the 3rd verse, and they were marched back to the land Bountiful, and Teancum, by orders of Moroni, caused that they should commence labor in digging a ditch around Bountiful. Most they called it the land or the city. Remember, they were city-states, just exactly as it was in Israel. Whatchamacallit, documents, you know, I always turn off the lights on Monday. I'm no good on Monday. But well, anyway, oh, that's ridiculous. These documents speak of that. Well, early documents from the 13th century. I'll think of 5 seconds. I always do, but it's humiliating, isn't it? These documents from the 13th century BC and 14th century BC, they speak of the land of Jerusalem. Just as the Book of Mormon was. It says the Lord should be born in the land of Jerusalem, and that's been taken as a great slip up on part of the Book of Mormon. But Jerusalem wasn't just the city, it was the land around it, just as Athens was the land, it was all of Attica, and she was the land around, and Sparta, she was all of that. And and so they marched them back, and they commenced digging, making the fortifications. And they're standard. The breastworks with the timbers on the top, and encircle them, just as the Indians in the Mississippi Valley had the same type of structures. And they did it over large areas, you see. And in that city they did guard the prisoners, the Lamanites. Now it says Moroni was compelled to cause the Lamanites to labor because it was easy to guard them that way when they were working. You could watch them. That's why you make prisoners of war. But that wasn't included in the Geneva Convention, and he apologizes for it. So he had to be compelled. Well, why is it wrong to make prisoners do some work and so forth and so on? But what type of work they're doing, you see, they cannot be forced to fight their own people. They're participating in the war if they're doing this, you see. But of course now we know that anything you do helps the war effort, so anything you have them do will do that. Usually prisoners just stay around. They can refuse to do any work at all if it will help against their side. So of course it was the Amarna letters I was trying to think of. I don't know why I kept thinking of the letter B all the time. It's the Amarna letters. And and then it was the Amarna letter, because the Amarna, of course, was in central Nile, but they didn't come from Amarna. They came from up on the coast of Palestine there. And he obtained possessions of the city of Mulek. He has three victories here. He got the city and the stronghold of the Lamanites, and he built a stronghold to retain his prisoners. He could take care of it, and he solved 3 problems in one. And he went on preparing, and especially providing food was an important thing. Now, this is what happens. Notice in the 8th verse here, you think things will be going well, but what spoils it? Their own silliness. Came to pass the armies of the Lamanites on the west sea south, while the absence of Moroni on account of some intrigue. Moroni couldn't be there, and what he wanted to do was then move to the west and hold them there, but he couldn't because of some intrigue among the Nephites, which caused dissensions among them and gained some ground over the Nephites, which allowed the Lamanites to win some because the Nephites had to start fighting among themselves, having contentions. And thus, because of iniquity among themselves, yea, because of dissensions and intrigue among themselves, they were placed in the most dangerous circumstances. That always happens that way. And we get here, you see, the human element. Incidentally, why do we find these, you notice how easily people in ours quarrel with each other. That's the theme of the Iliad. That's the theme, remember, the quarrels, Kerdain Phaleon, how do you say? The chiefs of the lords are always struggling, always jealous of each other, always jealous of each other's meed of honor and so forth. That goes all through the Iliad. See, it's a military epic. And all through the others, there's much striving because of ambitious people. And this accounts for a very important phenomenon in the army. It seems to us superficial, the things they do. It was Leopold of Anhalt-Dessau. Now, see, I can remember his name without any trouble. can't remember my own. It was Leopold of Anhalt-Dessau who invented in the middle of the 18th century, invented the manual of arms. It's a perfectly artificial form of drill. It has no useful function whatsoever as far as that goes. But it's very necessary to have them do these drills and cooperate on these things and do these things together here. And we have to have these constant reminders of rank, which is one of the ranking things in the army. It's absolutely necessary. And have almost reverence for rank. Otherwise, how soon jealousy would break out in open defiance. You can't have that, you see. So you must almost make the salute. We have to salute on all occasions. Now, the Germans don't salute off duty in their army. The Russians don't. The British don't. I mean, if a fellow's an old college friend in the army, nothing to that. I mean, it's great. But not in our army, you see. You salute off duty. You see, we're very strict there because we need it more. I remember when just about the third day in Normandy, we were having a very bad time because no other, and finally somebody got through from the Navy, and it was Tom Hungerford, who'd been a student of mine in Claremont. And we immediately embraced good old Tom Hungerford. In fact, he'd been a student in a one-man class, a Greek class for a time. And whereupon the officers, it was in this little farmhouse, we were trying to hold on by the skin of our teeth, and he brought in some artillery from the sea because we couldn't get any, you see, and they were very accurate and very valuable. So here came Tom Hungerford. He was our connection with the Navy. But boy, they were quite upset when I talked to Tom Hungerford as an equal, you see. Oh my gosh, they didn't like that at all. We don't talk to officers that way, because he had got to be quite a high officer in the Navy. Well, this reminds me of another story which is too good to miss. A very good friend of mine was George Allen, whose family, he's a Pennsylvania Quaker. His family owns the oldest bookstore perhaps in America at 2031 Walnut Street in, 3021 in Philadelphia. And he had a twin brother, an identical twin. And they joined the army together. They did everything together and so forth. And you know, when you're assigned certain things and you come here and they got to a certain point, well, they came to a certain line and one brother was assigned to one camp and the other to another, just like that is the way it happened. So at the end of the war, these two identical twins, my friend George, who was very active, he got Bronze Stars, things like that, George Allen, he was a corporal, and his brother was a colonel at the end of the war. They were identical twins, and one wasn't any smarter than the other and so forth. But at the end of the war, after a few years, it wasn't very long, 3 or 4 years, one was a colonel and the other was a corporal. Well, that's the way things go. It's the way the cookie crumbles. What can you do about it? I think it's no, but these artificial things have to be done. You have to set up an artificial situation here, and this is necessary to keep people in line. This is it, the salute and all that. Otherwise, armies would quickly fall to pieces in personal factions because they start intriguing. You know, there is so much bitterness and so forth. That's why it's a court-martial offense once the fighting stops. Once you go back, once you get in the LST to go back to England again, have a round of ammunition on your person is a court-martial offense because the officers are scared to death of anybody who has ammunition. Because they say there was a lot of fragging went on in Vietnam, but there was quite a bit in the European theater that we don't talk about. Well. And it was because of iniquity among themselves, the most dangerous circumstance. So they have to preserve this discipline against great odds. And so these artificial things, but that drill did a great deal of good. I mean, it's purely artificial. Walk this way, why do you turn that way? The manual of arms and so forth. Leopold of Anhalt-Dessau, he died of a apoplectic fit when he learned that his 12th or 13th child was learning to read. That was the kind of a man old Leopold was. Old powder face, they call him. Well, anyway, and now he's going to tell us about, here's a peaceful story about the people of Ammon. Notice they were Lamanites, just as the Zoramites were Nephites. They really switched characters here with the 10th verse here of the next chapter. Yes, that's right. They were Lamanites, but by Ammon, or rather, who in the beginning were Lamanites, but by Ammon and his brethren, or rather by the power of the word of God. Notice you know how the Book of Mormon uses that doublespeak from time to time. He says, by Ammon, then it catches itself, no, rather, it was really the power of the word of God. It wasn't Ammon, you see. Now we specify this way. They sort of demur here. This Book of Mormon is demur. It tells a story at 2 levels, you see. We're always reminded in the Book of Mormon that the Lord is behind all these things. It wasn't Ammon that converted them, and he catches himself, or rather by the power of the word of God, rather than wasn't Alma that did it, you see. Well, that seems to be quibbling something. That's not so. We talked about Greek chorus before. Well, a Greek chorus comments on the play and tells us what's really going on, you see. The superficial play is before your eyes, but what is really going on is something deeper than that. The positivist says we've seen everything there is, as Gertrude says when Hamlet asks whether he sees his father, she sees his father or not, which he can see. She says, nothing at all, yet all there is I see. Well, now, is that true? It's right for her. She's true. She's saying, speaking truly when she says she doesn't see anything. But is she right when she says, I see everything there is? Well, that's what we say all the time. We say, I don't see anything at all. But that's the positivist position. If I don't see it, it doesn't exist. Nothing at all, yet all there is I see. But here, especially the Egyptians, of course, review the momentary event as just a shadow of something. Alan of Leal's famous poem, Omnis mundi creatura quasi libera et pictura nobis est speculum nobis vita non spectacular. Everything we see is just a reflection in the mirror as far as that goes. It's not the real thing that's behind it. There must be a whole generations of causes behind it, something building up behind. There's a big reason, and this is just a superficial reflection for the moment. It's fleeting, it passes. Omnis mundi creatura. Every creature in this world, quasi libera pictura, is like a book and a picture. Nobis est spectrum is for us a book and a mirror, as if we were looking in a mirror. And then the final expression is signaculum. What kind of signaculum is it? I always forget the key word. It always comes back later. Great comfort. Well, and so we have these things. Now, the greatest play I think I've ever read, I just looked at it and I didn't realize how great it was. It just bowled me over completely. And that's the Oedipus of Colonus by Sophocles. He makes it so perfectly clear that all this play, you see, everything you see, this is just a shadow theater. Of course, in the ancient world, the shadow theater was the oldest of theaters, a shadow theater, Far East and so forth. And the old shadow theater was the Garden of Eden theater. The old shadow theater used to play the Garden of Eden. That was the theme of the shadow theater. Arabs, in Arab countries, an old man travels around with a showbox, a monkey or something, and his donkey, and he has a shadow theater, and he puts it up, he has the shadow, and people all watch, and it's Adam and Eve's story. I have a rather interesting book I read, I picked up in Damascus. You can't get another copy of that book, believe me. Well, so the momentary event is merely a type. Their unique events in history are lost forever. The only reason you have any history is things happen over and over and over again. So we talk about the recurrent events in the Book of Mormon. There are recurrent events all the time. And it's these recurrent, typical events that can mean something to us that we can rely on. It's happened before, it'll happen again, and that's the way we are. So he says, so there's this by-comment, as if you had a commentator there, somebody special to point out that this isn't the real thing and explain how it is. He is the Cherecheb, as the Egyptians would call him, the commentating priest, the priest that explains what's going on. He is in the temple, he is your paralimptor, the person who stands at your elbow and explains to you the ordinances and gives you the words you're supposed to speak. That in the ancient mysteries and so forth. We have paralimptors in the temple too. Oh boy. And then they'd taken their oath that they never would shed blood more. And remember, because the Lord had said, had forbidden it in all things and so forth. But it came to pass when they saw the danger, when they saw their benefactors were in such terrible trouble, intimate danger that they could help, they were about to pitch in and help. And when they saw the afflictions that the Nephites bore for them, they were moved with compassion, were desirous to take up arms in defense, but they're stopped cold. Both Helaman and Moroni said, nothing doing. We're not going to do that. They were overpowered by the persuasions of Helaman and his brethren. Now, Helaman needed their help the worst way, but he said, it's better that we lose than that you break your oath. And his brethren, they were about to break the oath they had made. Then Helaman feared lest by doing so they should lose their souls. That was more important. Do we have such integrity today? They needed them most. But the point is, you must not cheat, even if it means you'll lose. You see, we can't conceive of that, do anything to win, you see. But he says, no, it's not forbidden. Oh, that's a wonderful story in the Clementine recognitions. We won't stop for that, though. I'm remembering and forgetting so fast today. Everything comes, everything goes. Well, and his brethren, they were about to break the oath, and then he said they should not lose it better than losing their souls. Now, that sounds possibly absurd to us. Why would they lose that chance, lose that help? And no, it was no wonder. But then you notice it tells us an interesting theme here is compassion. An interesting theme in the Book of Mormon would be that, wouldn't it? Sportsmanship in the Book of Mormon. Moroni plays a sporting game all the time. The enemy doesn't. They don't do anything. But remember Zarahemna, when he was talking to Moroni, lunged at him with his sword, and he got the top of his head cut off as a result of that. But Jacob, remember this Jacob that was leading them? After all the rest had surrendered, he decided to charge. Or Laman and Lemuel, the way they bullied poor Nephi and tied him up and beat him up and everything else, you see. There's some very poor sports in the Book of Mormon, to say the least. And this Amalickiah and his long list of dirty tricks. See, he never played fair at all. That's the way he won, of course. But there are people in the Book of Mormon who are very sporting and always play fair, and Moroni is one of them. That's, of course, his greatness. And Nephi the same way. And Jacob, well, the good guys play fair. The bad guys don't in the Book of Mormon. But there's a very sharp distinction made, and this is a typical example here, this idea of sportsmanship. Move them to compassion. There's Seymour here. We stand back here in the 37th verse, the 52nd chapter, I noticed that. An example. Now Moroni, seeing their confusion, said unto them, the Lehi pressed upon them with such fury from the rear. In the 37th verse, we just passed it. Moroni, seeing their confusion, said unto them, if you'll bring your weapons and deliver them, I will forbear, you see. Well, the confusion, that was the time to finish them off. Never have to bother with them again, but he didn't, you see. And the same way in the 5th verse of this chapter we're on here, where he says, yes, and this city became an exceeding stronghold, and they did guard the city, and where he has to apologize. He guards them, he makes them labor at this unpleasant labor, because he's compelled to. He has no choice there, makes his excuses. Well, but they had many sons, these people, these Ammonites, that were just babies at the time, and they hadn't entered into the oath. Of course, they were free to do what they wanted. And they assembled themselves together, got themselves together. They saw when their parents were discouraged, were told not to do it by Helaman. Helaman was the one that did the persuading, and by his integrities, he was the one that persuaded their parents and saved their eighth. And naturally, the boys would choose him to be their leader. Here's the man we can depend on. He's the one that practically appointed us to this calling, you see. They called themselves Nephites. They were Lamanites. They're not ashamed to call themselves Nephites. Now, as you're going to notice how Nephites become Lamanites. Zoramites, Nephites became Lamanites. Lamanites, Ammonites become Nephites. Goes like, so you're not talking about pure blood. I had a very important talk yesterday with a man who's done, well, president of Mexican Mission. That's a big problem down there, this race business, you know, and because of this trouble that Brother Lee had raised. Well, they call themselves Nephite and enter into covenant to fight for the liberty of the Nephites. There were 2,000 of them. They, to protect the Nephites from bondage, they take the fun and they take their oath. And this is another interesting thing. There was constant, all day long, there was a constant bringing in and interrogating of prisoners. You get them fresh when they're all shaken up, when they've just surrendered, and they'll tell you anything as far as that goes. But a very interesting thing, the kids that came from the village and believed what they were told, they wouldn't tell anything. But the big tough SS men who'd taken their fun and eye to the fear and this, that, they'd spill their guts. They were eager. That goes to show, you see, the tough ones, they were the ones that cracked, always first. It wasn't the one you'd expect to, because the kids were still idealistic, so they really believed. So I wouldn't question them at all. I wouldn't have anything to do with it. That's why I was fired. I wouldn't press people like that. Now so there were 2,000 of them, and you can trust they're going to go through with it now. Believe me, they are. And they chose that Helaman should be their leader. He was the one that told their parents they shouldn't lose their souls. Now there's a man we can follow. There's a man we can stick to. He's going to be honest all the way. A study of integrity, you see, is the Ammonites. And of course, the boys to him were true in all things because they saw how true and faithful he was. So they were true at all times in whatsoever things they were entrusted in. Of course, that is the one Helaman wouldn't hedge here, you notice. They were men of truth and soberness. The opposite of that is trickery and excess. They weren't trickery and excess, they were truth and soberness. But that's the one quality you want, of course. If you have people you can count on, then you feel good. You see, Brigham Young used to say, with 8 men, I feel far better than you could put an army behind someone. You couldn't trust them because they would break inside. And this happens again and again. So Helaman marched at the head of them. They put him at the head, and they wanted him, and they got him. So Amoran, whose advantage was this? Then Amoran, remember, he was the brother of Amaleki, and just as bitter as Amaleki. He's going to avenge him. Amoran sent a letter to exchange for him. Now here's tactless. Here is the temperament of Moroni. Very good commentary on Moroni. He's short-tempered. He is the most tactless person you can imagine. He's perfectly honest, but must be one of the things that makes him so tactless. But he is. This shows you Clausewitz is right when he says a military man should not make decisions of government, because he is forthright. He's one-dimensional. This Moroni is. You see, he goes straight ahead. So it came to pass Moroni desired provisions, and he desired to strengthen his people, and he wanted to exchange with to his advantage, you see, because, well, me to the Lamanites' advantage. All the Lamanites campers were soldiers, but the Lamanites, because of their sweep through the country, had conquered all the women and children too, and they had to feed them. They didn't like that at all. They wanted to get rid of them. The prisoner exchange would be to their advantage. They would get rid of these Nephite women and children. Weren't doing them any good. And for every family that got back, they would get a fighting man back, so the exchange would favor them. And so he wrote this letter to him. And he says, Behold, Amoran, I have written to you somewhat concerning the war. Now, the most tactless of letters. No, he's going to beat this in other letters. This isn't his most tactless letter. You have waged against my people. Notice it's personal. The war which you have waged against my people, or rather, which thy brother hath waged against them. No, there's the second. There's all this refrain. Thy brother has waged against them. And he invites him to repent and withdraw your armies. Now, he's carried away already, again. The sword of the... he preaches, tell you somewhat concerning the justice of God. I tell you that, but you won't listen. But he goes ahead and tells him anyway, you see. He has to unburden his soul. What is it, like a drab, a fishwife? Repent and withdraw your armies. I would tell you these things if you were capable of hearkening unto them. Can you suggest another approach than this? But I would tell you concerning that awful hell that awaits to receive such murderers as thou, you rascal. This is his weakness, you see. Return now, thy brother, thou and thy brother hast been. He has to insult his brother too. Except you repent and withdraw your murderous purposes and return to your own armies, to your own lands, you see. This is Moroni's weakness. He must go all the way. He will not compromise his position. He's not a diplomat. He's like Brutus, a plain, blunt soldier, and so he says things. And this happens all the time, of course. And he says, you have rejected these things, and so that I may expect you will do it again. I can't... remember Zerahemnah said cynically to Alma, he says, if I swear an oath, I'll break it. So they agreed on that too. But except you withdraw, he threatens you with utter destruction. And except you withdraw, it supposeth me that I talk to you in vain. Thou art a child of hell. Well, he's using the soft sail hill, isn't he? Moroni cannot restrain himself, you see, so he tactfully says, thou art a child of hell. Therefore, I will close my epistle telling you to hell with you, you see. I will not exchange prisoners, except it be, do you think he's going to get a deal on these terms? Except you will, on conditions, except you will deliver up the man and his wife and his children for one prisoner, you see. If this be the case, even I will arm, if you don't do this, I will arm my children. He says you can run but you can't hide, he tells them here. It shall be blood for blood, life for life, give you battle even until you are destroyed. I am in my anger. He is. He's ranting here. He admits to a terrible temper here. You see, and George Washington had a terrible temper too. Remember at the battle, you poltroons when he got it. Boy, did he swear there. I'm in my anger. If you see, well, you think of Patton here too the same way. Unrestrained. He just lets himself go. He doesn't, no tact to him. If you seek to destroy us more, we will seek to destroy you. I close my epistle. I am Moroni. I am the leader of the people of the Nephites. That's the way you terminate here. Now, You say, well, this is crazy. Why do we do this? No, this is perfectly routine. This is, he's just following accepted procedure for generals. This is the stichomathia, or stichomachia, you can call it either one you will. You know, in epic literature, any epic you want, whether it's the Shawn, or whether it's Homer, or whether it's the Aeneid, or whatever it is, the heroes, the leaders of the host, always before the battle have to stand up and at least spiel off a whole book, sometimes 2 books, of imprecations against the enemy. Tell him what he's done wrong, how evil he is, and the terrible things you're going to do with him. Then he comes and he replies. Now this is the stichomathia. Before the battle, you exchange insults to get yourselves worked up so you won't be just cold-blooded murderers. When you're good and hot and fired up, then you're willing to slaughter anything you to kill willingly. Well, but this is routine. We'll write it on the board. The stichomathia is represented in every Greek drama where there is a major confrontation between the kings. Well, the 7th against Thebes is a typical example. There's the army of Thebes, the army of Eteocles, and the army of his brother. And the two are fighting each other to the death, and they kill each other. Same sort of thing we're going to get in the Book of Mormon. And both armies destroy each other in the 7th. Eteocles and Tarni. So we have, oh yes, it's called stichomathia. A stichos is a verse. It's just a short speech, but that's immediately followed by a short speech from the other side. Then you say something, then he says something. Where you get that today is if you happen to revel in world-style wrestling, or whatever they call it. You know, they spend most of the time swearing at each other, saying what I'm going to do to you when we meet next week. And they tell you what a coward you are, and what a slump, and what a dolt, and I'm going to tear you limb from limb, and you won't have that championship belt when I get through with you. And then the other guy talks back, and they rear these artificial voices, they scream and they rear at each other. It's just high comedy, you know. But you hear these, but that's what they do. That's a stichomathia. Or stichomachia. Machia is when you fight at it. A stichomathia. Stichos is a verse, and mathia is you recite it to each other. But the stichos is that you combat. So that's what this is. He has to do this because then a Moran writes him back a letter that's just as insulting. Says just the same things and is just as mean about it and threatens to do the same things to him that he threatens to do to him. So we're in the human comedy over our ears here in the Book of Mormon.